Welcome to LHC Unplugged, where you'll hear unscripted conversations about life, faith, the Bible, and today's world with the pastors from LongHillChapel here in Chatham, New Jersey. Ready to grow in your spiritual journey? Let's dive in.
Hi everyone, welcome to LHC Unplugged. I'm Sarah Harrington. I am the Director of Communications here at LongHillChapel, and I have our lead pastor, Michael Hoddy. Hi, Pastor Michael.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here with you.
Excellent. It is 2026.
What happened?
I know. Now, are your Christmas lights still up? Is there
Yes. Let's talk about that. There's some hardcore people who take them down the day after Christmas. Like, I cannot go into the dreary, gray, depressing months of January and February without dragging it out as long as I can, but also not ticking off my neighbors at the same time. So they're still up. They're going to be up through the weekend, and we are loud and proud about that.
Now, are you an inflatable family?
I would like to be with some very specific parameters that exceed the scope of our conversation. We are normally not. There are a couple inflatables that if I could find them, like I really want a 40-foot tall inflatable Santa Claus, like one that you can see from space on my lawn. My wife just laughs bitterly whenever I say that. But anything else, no. We're just like lots of lights, and that's kind of our jam.
Well, that's fun. Now, 2026. Do you guys do anything at the turn of the year? Anything come to mind as a family or individually, or how you reset?
We don't do a lot of that. I mean, I think anyone naturally kind of looks back and looks forward. I do a lot of, like I take photos of everything, and so I have thousands of them, and I always kind of just go back, and it paints. That's how I kind of document the year.
Sure.
And it paints a picture, especially with your family, but just with things that happen. And so I kind of always am in that kind of looking back mode for the 2 weeks around the new year. But then looking forward and just kind of saying, what do I want to continue in this year? What do I want to, kind of see another step happen? And what do I wish I could leave behind?
Sure.
I think we all have those years where we are just like, okay, I'm done with you. Hope the next one's better. But nothing official. How about you?
We do a memory jar. So we put all memories, whether they are good memories, challenging times we had over the year. Throughout the year, we document them on a little scrap piece of paper, and I throw them in a memory jar. And at the end of the year, we open them up. And then my husband then writes down in a little notebook kind of a recap of the year. And I think the funniest one going back was when we looked at the recap of 2019, heading into 2020. And that just really goes to show you never know what's ahead, right?
Yeah, bitter laughter.
Right, exactly. But we are here now in 2026.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say you guys are such great parents for doing that.
Thank you, Pastor
awesome.
Michael. Yes, most of the time we try to be, right? Now we're heading into the new year. So with that, we have a new sermon series called Reset. So talk to me a little bit about that. Why reset?
Well, I think it comes back to what I was saying a little bit ago, that we naturally, whether we make New Year's resolutions or not, we naturally just have this sense that when the calendar changes, it's a new thing. Now, I think, if I'm honest, the people going into that new year and where they are and if they're looking at themselves like that's more important than the fact that the date changed and the year changed. And we're going to right it wrong for the next 30 days until we figure out where we are. But there is this natural reflection that we have, and we make goals, and we begin to have hopes, and we look back, and we kind of do all the things like you said that you do. And so this is a natural point, I think, at which most people, in some informal or formal way, they're saying, okay, what do I want this to look like? We're starting with a new calendar.
Sure.
And it feels like a clean sheet, even though sometimes it's not.
Now, you made a really good point in your first sermon in the sermon series about just because it was something to the fact of just because the calendar changes doesn't mean you change with it.
Yeah, isn't that depressing?
Well, it's not depressing. It's powerful in a sense, and it's kind of gives us that little push, right, to make the change if we need.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the person underneath the resolutions or the goals or whatever. Otherwise, you end up just trying to gut it out, like on sheer willpower. Sometimes you have people around you, like if you're, getting back into fitness or something like that, or diet too can kind of hold you accountable. But if you're not looking under the surface about who am I and how did I end up in this place that I want to move on from, if you don't have that reflection, it's not going to last. And the depressing thing about so many New Year's resolutions, I think I've heard two numbers. I've heard 80% fail and like 90 or 93% fail. And I don't think it's because of a lack of good intentions. And I don't even think it's because of a lack of hard work and desire. Like, people have good intentions, they want it to happen, they put some work in, but there's something more underneath the surface that needs to happen for that to go anywhere. And that's really, when we look at reset, especially as people of faith, that's where we need to go, is first of all, under the surface, but also the fact that when you reset, you're resetting to something. So you're not just like, okay, I'm going to do whatever. You actually have a reference point, and that's what we had talked about in the first sermon in the series, that you have to have a benchmark. You have to have somewhere that you're looking to enable yourself to reset in a meaningful way. And if you don't, it's just kind of vibes. It's kind of whatever the world says, or whatever the people around you say, or whatever your feelings or your appetites or your sense of guilt or your past or the people around you. There's all these other things that fill in that gap.
So why do you think it's so hard for us to find that reference point?
Just because there's so many of them. I actually think it's two reasons. I think sometimes we're just not thoughtful. We're not thoughtful about the fact that we need to do that. But I think the bigger one is we're just overwhelmed with things and voices and things in the world and things within ourselves and things in the people around us who are telling us what we ought to be, who we ought to be, how we're falling short, who we need to become. Just all manner of different, like, there's so many of them. I could go on forever and ever about all of the things. And so we're just really shaped by those things. And so whether we have thought about the fact that we have to base these on some sort of reference point, when you navigate anywhere, you're really navigating with something telling you where you are. But there's just so many. Yeah. And it's not just like advertising and the outside voices of our culture. Those are pretty big. But it's also the things within us. It's our hopes, which are great, but it's our fears, it's our insecurities, it's our past, it's the baggage we've brought with us that we might not even know that we have. And so we're just overwhelmed by those things. And kind of the voice that speaks the loudest is the one that gets the vote.
Yeah. So talk to me a little about when we're resetting. So we think new beginnings. Kind of talk to me from Pastor Michael's standpoint and the theology behind it. What does it say in the Bible about that?
Yeah, this is a great point, because I think anyone like me, and I think in the first sermon we did in this series, we do what every church says. It's like, you should fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. That's your reference point. 100% true. But how do you do that? And the Bible does actually talk about this. It doesn't necessarily talk about it in the sense of the new year, but it talks about what this reset process looks like. Really, and I'm going to talk about this in the next part of our series. Reset is really, it's about realigning with God's purpose for us. It's about realigning with who God has called us to be. And the direction that he's led us in. A lot of the reset stuff that we do just kind of as a culture and as people is about self-improvement. Nothing wrong with that. 100%, totally nothing wrong with that. But if our goal is trying to improve us without any kind of context around it, it kind of ends up not accomplishing a whole lot. But in the scriptures, the thing I think we see a lot about reset is it involves returning to something. I made a bunch of things rhyme because that's what preachers do. They make stuff rhyme. But it always involves a returning. You see throughout the Bible from beginning to end, there's this idea that we kind of wander off. We get off course. We end up somewhere else, and there's this call to return. In the Old Testament, that was true. In the prophets, that was true. It's really what Jesus meant when he said to his early disciples, "Come follow me." The only way you can follow someone is if you stop following some other things or some other someone's. and just on and on it goes. But the other part, and this is a loaded word, return, it requires turning away from something and turning towards something. And there's actually a Hebrew word for that, but we translate it as our word repentance. In the New Testament, repentance is very often, it's translated from a Greek word that means to turn in another direction. But in the Hebrew sense, in the Old Testament, and when the prophets are writing especially, it's about returning. It's about the fact that you were somewhere, you kind of ended up off course somewhere, and there's a call to return. And I think in terms of theology, we can look at that as our entire lives. We're born fallen people, as the book of Romans says. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So we're starting kind of off course. There's that old hymn that we sing sometimes in church that has a line that's like my favorite hymn lyric. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for your courts above. And that's that idea that we wander, but we have to come back. In order to do that, repentance involves releasing something, letting go of something, owning our part in where we went with it. So this isn't just like, okay, whoops, I ended up over there. It's saying there's something in my heart that continues to pull me in that direction. It continues to pull my affections. And to bring that before the Lord and say, I'm returning to you. I own that this is my condition and I ask your forgiveness, but I know that it's available to me in Jesus Christ. So when we're centering, when we're resetting, when kind of back to where we started on this crazy rabbit trail, when we're fixing our eyes on Jesus, we start there. We have to start with repentance, with returning. And then everything else kind of goes out from there. But like you look in the prophets, I was thinking about the Old Testament book of Joel, which we're actually going to do a series on here later in the year. One of the things it says in the middle is it says, return to the Lord. And so there's this idea that we need to return. We need to come back. In the book of 1 John, which we're also going to talk about this year, kind of along with all the other things we're doing. In the first chapter, it says this, it says, if we confess our sin, and none of us like to do that.
Yeah.
None of us like to say, I fall short. I've fallen short. I've done it actively, intentionally. I've done it without meaning to, but there's just something in me that misses the mark all the time. Like when we can come clean on that, and we can do it before God, and we can realize that condemnation is not what's given to us when we do that, but forgiveness and peace and really restoration in that return. We can actually do that joyfully. The rest of the world around us, if you come clean, there's usually some condemnation. You have to eat some crow, like whatever it is. That's not how it is with God. God's not just like, I want to smack you. He is saying, you need to recognize who I am, who you are, where you are, and what I've done to bridge the gap. That's really what repentance is.
And I think it's so important to remember that because it's hard to leave some things behind, right? Like it's hard to make this pivot in a sense. But it's good to remember that we're centered in Him, right? But there's still a fear in taking that turn. So, talk to me a little bit about fear. And if someone hears this and they're like, yes, I want to do that. I want to take that turn. I want to leave certain things behind. I want to follow Jesus. How, if there's that fear?
We could go way in the weeds on really what fear is, and maybe I will for just a second. If you think about what is fear, fear is actually a fear of death. And that sounds all big and ominous, and it's true. I think most people have that wired into them. It's also the thing that keeps us alive and keeps us from doing really crazy stuff. So there's actually a healthy aspect of fear, but there's an unhealthy aspect of fear. And when it comes to our lives, it's that same principle, that there's this thing that represents the end of ourselves, which is really what death is. And it gets it way down on a much smaller level. So when we are realizing that in order to go in a new direction, we have to turn from an old direction, we're letting go of something. We're releasing something. We're actually holding a small funeral, a very small funeral for some part of our lives or some way we've It's like, if you decide, I'm going to drop 20 pounds, you have to hold a small funeral for your love of donuts. You just have to do it. And that's one of my biggest struggles. But we love the idea of reset until we recognize that there's a price tag to it. And with that price tag is something that feels like death. Maybe not in the cosmic, the ultimate reality of that, but in a small way. This is one of the reasons people get stuck in their lives. They get stuck in different seasons of their lives that are over. The Bible talks a lot about that too. Like in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says everything has a season. There's a time to be born. There's a time to die. There's a time to do this. There's a time to do that. Some of them are negative. Some of them are positive. And the thing I think that's really interesting that the writer does is he does not cast judgment on the seasons, like the different ones, the positive and negative ones, just like your memories that you had from the past year. There's some good ones. There's some bad ones. There's some ones that you want to hold on to. There's some ones that you would be very happy to never have to think about again. But one of the things we get stuck on is just realizing that certain seasons come to an end. When we grow from a child or we grow from a teenager into an adult, and the scriptures talk about this too, there's some ways that we have to leave behind us. There's some ways that we could do then, but that we can't do now. If we are trying to reset some area of our lives, there's some ways that whether actively we've participated in them or passively they've just kind of happened to us or we've let them happen, that we need to let go of. If we decide to have kids, we have to let some things go to receive some other things. And so the thing that gets people stuck around this is this fear thing. It's actually it's those small deaths, those small funerals that people have to hold, we have to hold for various parts of our lives, even when they're good things, because there's good things that have seasons too. And I think that's the hardest part. Like most people are like, bad thing, don't want to see it again. Let's hold the funeral. Great.
Right.
But when it's a good thing, it's a good thing that either has it's expired its season or there's a better thing. I think that's the call of the people of God, especially now. And the thing that's hard is not, it's not leaving terrible things for good things. It's actually leaving good things in our lives for God's best, for better things.
It's so interesting as you're talking about seasons. I can't help but think of as a parent, right? Like when you're talking about you have to leave some good things behind. The last time one of your children reaches up to hold your hand, right? It's things like that's what I'm hearing. And you're right. When I'm sitting listening to the sermons, I think about, oh yeah, let's leave the bad stuff. Yeah, we can drop that. But when you turn it and say, but you have to leave some of the good things and it's for the betterment, but you have to almost get out of your own way.
Yeah, no, and we're both parents, so we could just sit here and get very emotional about that, and I do. I am aware that there was a first time for everything, and there will be a last time. There will be the last time that I'm able to pick my son up, and I won't know that it's the last time. There's I'm not a hoarder, but it would be very easy for me to be one because it's just I don't want to let the little kid season go. But in order to, first of all, you can't hold on to it. And secondly, in order to embrace the gifts of the next season, you have to make space from the last season. And that kind of gets to another aspect of reset. And it's this, when you're resetting, you can't bring it all with you. I think we have this idea. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this new thing, or it's going to be this new thing, or I'm going to, follow Jesus with this part of my life, but I want to bring all of the other ways I've been living and the things I've been doing and the things that that I've valued, and even many very good things. I can bring them with me untouched, and that's just not how it works.
Is there anything looking forward as we continue this sermon series that you want to tease a little bit, or anything we're going to be talking about moving forward? Any certain points you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, we're going to actually talk. We're going to talk about some things because that's what we do. But it really is this idea. This the one that's coming up this week. I am going to talk about what we kind of one of those topics we struggle with in the church, and that's repentance. Mm-hmm. I think many of us have seen angry late night TV preachers who are yelling at people and slamming their Bibles on. And it's just like this fire and brimstone thing. But kind of because of that, and because our culture has said, you're okay and I'm okay and we can all do whatever we want, and we have our truth and you have your truth and I have my truth, which is not how truth works, we've gotten away from the fact of really that there's a return that we all have to continually do. But so I'm going to talk about that, because that is the starting place. Like, we talked about the fact that Jesus is the reference point. But once you've established that Jesus is the reference point, okay, now what? What do you have to do next? Jesus didn't just come to kind of be your pop culture inspirational sane guru. He just didn't do that. And so what do we do with Jesus? What does Jesus call us to? But then once we've aligned ourselves, once we've returned, once we've said, the ways I've gone don't lead to life, they actually lead into places that are the place of fear, the place of death, then we can look at our own lives again. And we can look at the good things that God has put in each of us, and they're all different. And we can then say, with the right alignment, how does this work itself out? How has God given this to me as a gift to the world around us, so people see a picture of Him? And also selfishly, so we see the blessing that we all want. One of the kind of ironies, I think, of our world is that we're told that blessing or joy or happiness comes from a whole bunch of places that it doesn't, that it ultimately doesn't. Maybe it does for a little bit or for a season, but it ultimately runs out. And when we get this alignment thing right, it seems like a death because we have to walk away from something. Nobody likes that. But the good news of the gospel is that, number one, Jesus has power over death, and number two, He's defeated it. But He hasn't just done that so we can reap the benefits on the other side. He's done that actually so in all of these ways, we actually join Him in that process. We take up our cross and we follow Him. We die to certain things so that we can be raised to life in other ways. And the scriptures just talk about this all over the place. But when we do that, we actually find purpose. We actually discover our purpose. And I'm going to talk about 4 P's. I'm going to talk about passion, position, proficiency, and people. Like, when those things are in alignment with who God is, when we've owned ourselves, when we've come clean, when we've decided to actually follow Jesus, those things begin to work themselves out, not only in our lives in a way that truly brings blessing to us, but it also brings blessing to the world around us.
Well, that's inspiring, right?
I hope so.
It definitely is. Well, for anybody listening, if you've never joined us in person, we do gather at 10:15 on Sunday mornings, but you can also join us online, and that's at LHCNJ.net. And again, that's at 10:15 on Sunday mornings. But for now, I think we will end this first podcast of 2026 for LHC Unplugged. And if you ever have any questions you want Pastor Michael to answer, because he has the answers to all of them.
I do not.
You're kind of close. You're pretty good.
No.
You can email us at questions@LHCNJ.net. And we can move those and work those into the podcast throughout the year. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Pastor Michael, for just giving us that inspiration and teaching us how to reset.
Well, this is a journey. This is a journey I am on. It's a journey we're all on together. And that's the beauty of this is, I don't have all the answers, but Jesus is faithful. He's faithful to us, to lead us, to guide us, to provide for us. And He calls us together. One of the best things about being part of a church community like LongHillChapel is it's just such a wonderful group of people who have seen all different parts of life. And when we get on this journey of reset, this journey of finding purpose together, God is in our midst, but there's just incredible joy on the journey.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Pastor Michael.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.